Hello and welcome to the Texas Public Policy Foundation's live stream on the Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas' testimony before the House Judiciary Committee today. It is an interesting testimony. It is a testimony, unfortunately, doesn't entirely comport with the facts about what's happening on the border. And so to discuss that, to illuminate what he got right, which is a short conversation, and what he got wrong, which is a much longer conversation. We have with us today two of the most eminent scholars, researchers, and advocates on border security with us. Two men who I'm proud to call both colleagues and friends, both from the Border Security Coalition helmed at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. First, we have Ken Oliver, my colleague, Senior Director of Engagement and Right on Immigration at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Ken has spent a lifetime working toward liberty-based policies that bring Americans the security that we deserve under the Constitution. His career has been divided between his native Washington, D.C. and his mother's homeland of Puerto Rico. He worked in the George W. Bush administration and was also a special assistant to former Puerto Rico Governor Luis Fortuño as Assistant Secretary of State. Ken, we're very, very grateful to have you with us. We also have with us our Senior Distinguished Fellow for Border Security at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Rodney Scott, who was the 24th Chief of the United States Border Patrol. There's very few individuals in American public life today who understand firsthand the situation at the border quite like Rodney does. We're very, very grateful to have him. I think that at the culmination of a 3-decade career in the Border Patrol, the highest accolade that I can give Rodney is the one that former acting CBP Commissioner Mark Morgan gave him when he said he was the absolute embodiment of the U.S. Border Patrol's motto, honor first. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this live stream. This live stream is going to be structured as a brief conversation among the three of us. And then, of course, there will be audience Q&A after about 20 minutes. So stick around for that. Save your questions, and you all should have the ability to enter them in the input box there on your screen. Gentlemen, I will toss this to both of you, and whoever wants to answer first, please do so. The picture that Secretary Mayorkas has tried to paint today, both in his memorandum to the committee and also in his testimony, seems quite rosy. Especially for those of us who know the border, who know South Texas in particular. Let me read you a statement from the memorandum. This is a quote from the Secretary. Under the Biden-Harris administration, the Department of Homeland Security has been executing a comprehensive and deliberate strategy to secure our borders and build a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system. That seems like a great point to tee off. Ken, Rodney, what do you think about that?
Let me start with that one. I mean, the exact opposite is true. The Biden-Harris administration has been, as Rodney will elaborate, has been dismantling effective border management, immigration law enforcement, asylum policy. And that's been what's leading to this tremendous, vast amount of human smuggling and drug trafficking, which is anything but humane, orderly, or safe.
Rodney?
Yeah, I like how they put the words together. He is nothing but a master of words lately. I do believe that they are acting on a deliberate plan, but it's not to secure the borders. It's actually quite the opposite. And if you watch the entire testimony, either he's very, very disingenuous, or I'm getting to the point now, he's literally delusional. He went on in his statements to say that the border is secure, the border is more secure than it was under Trump administration. And that's just not true. I was having a conversation with somebody last night, and I pointed out, as the Secretary of DHS, he's not only responsible for the border, he also oversees the Transportation Security Administration. He also oversees FEMA. So I just wonder if he uses the same definition of secure when he's reviewing their operations. So with the Southwest border, just this year, the U.S. Border Patrol has reported over 360,000 known documented gotaways. And that's not even talking on how much of the border is not even being patrolled. So could you imagine if we took that same definition, if that's secure, and applied that to TSA, to Transportation Security Administration, to the airport setting, that if 70% of the people going into an airport actually complied and or at least got caught as they were trying to go around without going through security, but 30% made it past, got onto an airplane without going through security. That seems to be this secretary's definition of secure. And I think that's delusional. It's just his testimony was ripe with inaccuracies, and I'm coming a little short of calling them lies, but definitely definitely not, they weren't true.
Can you, can either of you put this, what we're seeing now, into historical context? Those of us who work and deal with border immigration security affairs understand that what we've seen in the past year, what we expect to see, especially once Title 42 goes away, will probably be historic inflows. And that means something to folks in the border states, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, South Texas. It may not mean something to those fellow Americans who live in other states. Can you put into context what we're seeing and sort of historically illuminate where we're at in these migrant inflows?
You want me to start, Ken, and then jump in?
Sure. Yeah.
So as you mentioned earlier, I spent 30 years as a Border Patrol, almost 30 years as a Border Patrol agent. Throughout my entire career, we did have ebbs and flows, but we were consistently getting better and better. We talk in the media, they talk a lot about the flow today being comparable to 1986. It was like 100 or 1.6 million apprehensions. It's nothing like that. It's totally different. The dynamic today is, first and foremost, we're not trying to slow down the flow. We're actually just facilitating the processing of people into the U.S. But the demographics have changed dramatically. In '86, it was primarily adult males from Mexico coming over to work and then going back. Today, it's over 150. I heard actually now it's up to about 160 different nations exploiting the southwest border coming across, and we really don't know where they're from. But more importantly, the processes have changed dramatically, where you could use to process somebody very quickly, return them to Mexico. It takes approximately 2 hours to process somebody under immigration proceedings, Title 8, and that backs up the agents. So the difference is, at least then we had, up till this year, really, we had Border Patrol agents out in the field actually trying to apprehend people that were trying to get away. Today, the cartel is shaping the border environment. They control every single crossing. They tell these groups when and where they can cross, and they use the people willing to try to claim asylum, most of them under false pretenses, but still they're going to walk up and surrender. The cartel is using them. They push them across in large groups, and they basically overwhelm Border Patrol resources systematically. That creates holes in border security where there is no law enforcement, and that's where the cartel is bringing across the people that won't surrender, criminals, and all the narcotics. For example, if you've been following Texas Operation Lone Star, every one of those apprehensions, the 2,000 pounds of cocaine, I think it's 180 pounds of fentanyl, I think it was over 11,000 felony arrests. Every one of those would have been a got-away because there are literally no Border Patrol agents out on the border. They're in the stations processing the people they caught yesterday, the day before that. And the biggest difference is there's absolutely no effort from this administration whatsoever. And I think that the new plan highlights that just as well as the actions to slow down the flow. They just want to talk about processing people into the United States faster. And this is not a sustainable model. Border Patrol is already overwhelmed and our national security is clearly at risk.
Yeah, and we're seeing, Rodney, this week, this is the new plan, right? They've announced for Southwest border security, which is chock full of, I will say, lies. And for example, saying that they're administering consequences for unlawful entry, including removal, deportation, and prosecution, when those numbers are way down, when we're having tremendous increases in illegal migration and fraudulent claims of asylum, we should be seeing big increases in arrests. We're seeing the exact opposite. And this plan they announced is not inspiring confidence. And that's why you're seeing even more Democrat senators this week. I think they're one short of getting to a 60 majority between Republicans and Democrats to demand that Title 42 be kept in place. Because after all, Dr. Fauci, the day before yesterday, said the world is still in a pandemic, according to him. And just today, we're seeing Democrats still wearing masks and wanting to enforce mask mandates. So apparently, there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy on their part.
How do we understand? Because I think this is important as we go through this conversation. How do we understand what the criteria are for a secure border, and how does the administration's ambitions, plans, statements fail to reach that?
Yeah, I can jump in there. There's a traditional definition of secure the border is basically like any police department. It's to manage the risk and get it down to where people feel safe and we have a reasonable understanding of who and what is simply entering our country. But Congress went a little bit farther. Congress defined in law the definition of operational secure. And that basically said flat out that we know who and what enters our country, and we have the ability to stop it. So that was part of building out the original Fence Act, and then building the wall system, is so that the Border Patrol agents could systematically know and then respond to any incursion. That wall and the technology that was going in with it made every single agent much more effective. They could cover significantly more area. And all of that was shut down. But even if you go with just a traditional law enforcement definition of secure, which it's a little touchy-feely, but basically it's that the community feels safe, businesses are coming in, it doesn't mean there's no crime or no illegal entries, but it's at a low enough level where you're managing it and you can effectively respond and you can make decisions on how much risk you're willing to tolerate. We can't even do that today, let alone the legal definition, which is basically a sealed border in between the ports of entry. But yet Mayorkas basically continues to tell America that the border is secure, even though it doesn't come close to either one of those definitions.
Ken, did you want to talk about that? Go ahead.
Under Rodney's leadership and the previous administration, we were moving in that direction. But even, let's be honest, even the screening at the ports of entry is not 100%. It's not where it should be yet. Much less, obviously, the lack of operational control over the between the ports of entry. So there's a lot of work to be done before the border can be declared operationally secure. And that is priority number one at this point for most people who are concerned about this issue.
Rodney, I want to go back to something that you said a few minutes back, talking about the cartels controlling the border. And it seems very qualitatively different. Those of us who have roots in South Texas remember that there was always sort of a back and forth flow of individuals who would cross legally and illegally, usually as individuals, perhaps to seek work. But that's generations now behind us. Also, those of us who know South Texas understand that it's fairly common. It's common knowledge that on the south side of the Rio Grande, there are cartels in control. Not really the Mexican state necessarily, not really the Mexican government or any kind of legitimate political force that ought to be exercising sovereign control over that territory. Instead, what we have are criminal organizations. Do you think the administration really grasps that? And if they do, how has that shaped or failed to shape their response?
So the term grasp, I don't know if they do or not. I briefed many people during the transition. I briefed everybody coming in on what was going on the border. Some of them just choose to not believe it or ignore it because it doesn't fit their worldview, their global view. Others like Secretary Mayorkas, he's been around, he's been in conversations and in all the high-level briefings. He knows the information, whether he understands it or not. I don't know. I tend to believe he does, and he's just ignoring it. But for those of you that don't understand, this has changed. I lived on the southwest border before I was in the Border Patrol. Over my 30-year career, I watched the border change dramatically. Migrants are not able to just walk up to the border, look left and right, and try to find an opportunity to come into the country anymore. Every inch of that southwest border is controlled by the cartels. And whether they pay those cartels directly or indirectly, the cartels control who and what crosses through that area. And whenever I talk to somebody I hate to pick sides, but on the far left that tries to say everybody's an asylum seeker and that they don't believe me, I just ask them this. If you were from some other country, you're coming to the US and your full intention was to claim asylum, surrender to the first law enforcement officer you saw, why would you wait until after dark, let alone 2, 3 in the morning to cross the Rio Grande River with your kids? Or why would you go hundreds of miles out into the desert where you know there's no water, there's no facilities whatsoever to cross the border? It's because the cartels are using these people as a weapon of war. They're using them to shape the battlefield. Those are how they look at it. And then draw all of our law enforcement resources away so that they can bring in all the higher commodity threats. Because they know if these people get caught and they get sent back, they'll pay another fee and they'll try to bring them in again. But they're using them as a tool. That has changed dramatically over the last 3 decades.
Ken, anything on that?
Yeah, and so the current policies are enriching the cartels. It's completing the cycle of human smuggling with U.S. taxpayer money, putting the Border Patrol into processing mode. The only thing that's improving is they're processing faster and they're focusing on processing and leaving, as Rodney pointed out, hundreds of miles of border or all the time, plenty of space for the cartels to operate and get their illicit drugs across.
Your mention of processing is a great segue. And by the way, for those of you who are watching the live stream right now, we are 5 minutes away from a Q&A. So do get your questions in. We'll have them answered. I want to read to you another passage from the Mayorkas memorandum to the committee. He says, and I quote, "We are administering consequences for unlawful entry, including removal, detention, and prosecution." Does that comport with what we actually see happening?
I think, go ahead.
DHS has lessened the consequences for unlawful entry. That's precisely what Border Patrol has been telling us over the years. When there are no consequences, or when there are very little consequences, that incentivizes the illegal entry. And not only that, but the new restrictions on ICE officers really is tying their hands. And you see that in the statistics in terms of arrests and deportations, and the collapse of the local and federal law enforcement cooperation in the 287G program, which this administration is basically dismantling.
Understood.
Yeah, I would just agree with Ken wholeheartedly. But just because there was one deportation, or they actually used the law 1 or 2 times out of a million, it's not technically alive, but it's definitely misinformation. They're not effectively using consequences, nor, and I have this from inside info, nor are they allowing anybody in the government currently to even talk about enhancing prosecution or any other consequence to slow down the flow. It's all about processing and letting them in.
Well, obviously, as Americans, we all want the federal government, whoever is running it, to succeed at their basic tasks, the core of which really is the security of our liberties in the nation. And border security is part of that. And it's unfortunate that we see the Biden-Harris regime failing to do that. I want to read you another quote, and then after this, we'll go to the audience Q&A. This is again from the Mayorkas memorandum. Quote, "We have a better understanding of who is attempting to enter the country than ever before." Rodney, you talked about this earlier, that something like 160 different points of origin from around the world. We don't know all of who they are. Can you speak a little bit to the specific security threat that gets brought along with this profusion of points of origin for illegal entrance?
Sure. So what he said is a flat out lie. And the reason I say that is because, like how Ken pointed out, I believe even the Union was quoted in a couple of articles, over 230 to 250 miles of border go unpatrolled, southwest border go unpatrolled on a daily basis now. But mixed in, if you just go statistically, mixed in with that flow is basically all of the above, whatever you're thinking of right now. Criminals from rapists to murderers, to include terrorists. So in my time as the chief, the very last year under Biden, we had already arrested 14 people off the terrorist screening list, or off the terrorist watch list, crossing the southwest border between the ports of entry. I saw media reports recently that there was up to 40 more identified and reported out to Congress. So to think that there are not real threats to our country that are taking advantage of this is just naive. And then now with the cartel, those are just the knowns, by the way. Those are the ones we actually put hands on. But with the cartel shaping the border at will, to be able to bring in people and commodities, and there's not a single Border Patrol agent left to respond, then we have no idea what crossed through. But we know, again, statistically, it includes all of those crimes. It actually does include terrorists. So Mayorkas is probably talking about relationships that we have with DOD, other countries where we're trying to vet people and figure out who they are before they get here. And that's all good and well. We need to continue that. That has gotten better. But when you don't simply know who or what is entering your country, all that information becomes irrelevant because you have no one to apply it to. So again, very much one small piece of information is true, and then he totally misleads the American public with the rest of his statement.
Ken, anything on that before we go to Q&A?
No, that's exactly right. The policies have been facilitating this trafficking and smuggling, the entrance of the illicit drugs, and it's the exact opposite of effective management. It's been incentivized, the trafficking.
Well, with that, I do want to move to the audience questions. Thank you all for being so patient, and thank you for submitting your questions. You still may as we talk. The first question that I want to ask is, and I think this is a very important one because it really shapes not just the policy, but the politics of what we see on the border. There are a lot of individuals who believe that a liberality in immigration policy, and even a straight opening of the borders to all comers, is compassionate. What do you say to those folks? What do you say to individuals who believe that allowing the type of entry that we see is fundamentally compassionate toward those who are coming in?
So let me, again, if you don't mind, Ken, it's exactly the opposite. And just think about general law and order. When there's chaos, criminals take advantage, human beings take advantage of each other. That's just how it is. So under the Mayorkas open border that we're having today with this massive amount of flows, there are more trafficking victims being snuck past us on a daily basis than we have any idea. There are more documented deaths in the desert. There are more people being raped. There's just more people to basically take advantage of. And let me give you an idea. And then law enforcement can't do their job. So in this particular arena, talking about child trafficking, for example, the only way agents can identify that is by interviewing people face to face. The only way that you can do that is to have time. With arresting on average 7,000 people a day right now, the Border Patrol doesn't have time to do those debriefs that they used to do. That's how we found fake families. And then the chaos along the border, even to the local communities, the massive amounts of people, it is not humane. I think this is what people also get tied up on, though, and I promise I'll shut up real quick. Border security and immigration are not the same thing. They're not synonymous. The immigration enforcement is a critical part of border security, but border security is simply knowing who and what enters your home. And I don't think there's any society in the world that doesn't accept the fact that you have a right to decide who and what comes into your home, and they should come through the front door. That's the port of entry. The who and what we allow in, that's the immigration discussion. And we should continue to have those discussions, and we should continue to be a country of immigrants. But that should come through the port of entry under controls. You can be pro-border security, you can be pro-law enforcement, and you can be pro-legal immigration. But massive illegal immigration hurts everyone. It doesn't help anybody except the cartel.
Including the immigrants. Ken, any thoughts on that?
Right. I mean, this massive flow really immediately affects local communities throughout the United States in terms of burdens on taxpayers, which we're already experiencing in terms of schools, in terms of healthcare, also just breakdown in social cohesion. It's lawlessness in our country is founded on the rule of law. It's what makes us different. And when we have a breakdown and a lack of enforcement of the laws on the books on a massive level, like we're seeing, it really undercuts core American institutions and our society.
We have another question, again, coming from a viewer. Obviously, the chaos is there, and it's becoming more and more obvious to those who choose to pay attention to it. So not just among those who live on the border, but other Americans now have the opportunity to see via social media and via various media outlets really what's going on there. And so the question is this. Is the evidence of the chaos, is the objective proof, so to speak, that the border is out of control, is that driving any change in Washington, D.C. at all?
Ken, you want to take that one first? You're up there.
Well, we are seeing more and more Democrats. In fact, Congressman Henry Cuellar just this week was saying, he's saying, will the administration please listen to the border communities? Do not lift Title 42. This is not the time to do it. It's like removing the finger from the dike. This is the last piece of enforcement that's had an effect in terms of turning people around. And there still is a pandemic with many, significant percentages of migrants crossing as recently as last month with COVID. And that's why Title 42 was put in the first place. You had, not only to protect migrants, but also to protect our Border Patrol agents, and because detention facilities cannot be filled up with people right now. So that's certainly, you're hearing more and more efforts by senators to put on the new COVID relief funding, to put a requirement that they extend Title 42 past May 23rd.
And I'll just add in, I think it is making some change, but I think we need to keep the message out there, because when you start switching through different channels, different media channels, and listening to the rhetoric on both extremes, it's some of it's not changing, and there's not a lot of coverage. I was just in New Mexico, and they were all complaining that no one's talking about how wide open the border in New Mexico is, and the failure to yields and the crash and burns. So we still have work to do, but I think there's definitely hope.
This actually is a good switch over. So taking the camera off of Washington, D.C. and moving it back to where Americans actually live. What can the average citizen do?
I think a lot of this is to have an adult conversation. So earlier question about open borders, isn't that more humane? Isn't that more compassionate? If you start the conversation on the far right or the far left, you shut a lot of people down. So I'm actually asking people to talk to their neighbors, get more involved, learn a little bit more, but approach it as border security is just like your home. It's not unreasonable to want to know or to control who and what enters your home. And then we can save the immigration discussion for a second. But right now, we can't even control who and what's coming into our home. And then remind people, nothing stays at the border. Everything is going somewhere interior, to a city, to a town, to a state near you. Fentanyl deaths across the United States, that has a direct border nexus. It came across the border, or any other overdose, a lot of the crime. And it's not a border issue. And I think reminding people of that as well. But you've got to find a way to do it that people will listen, and the kind of shouting from the rooftops isn't necessarily working. I think that a lot of things Texas Public Policy is doing, talking to the candidates, going out and having some of these different presentations where you have more of a Q&A, conversations just like this, I think do a lot more than people think. That we just need to keep it up.
And the American people will have a say this November as well at the ballot box, electing new officials who will support border security.
Well, we are just about at the end of our time, but I want to give you both an opportunity to say some final words on this. Ken, I'll start with you. Any closing thoughts as we enter into a new day in which Secretary Mayorkas is still in charge of our border policy?
Well, I just want to point out that our governor in Texas has really stepped up to the plate in terms of filling that gap, and our Department of Public Safety in Texas filling that gap, catching a lot of migrants who would have been gotaways. And there have been hundreds of thousands of gotaways, but Texas DPS has been apprehending many and prosecuting for criminal trespassing, building the state border wall, spending over $3 billion on border security. And that's in benefit of the entire nation. And as the governor said, he's working now with the Mexican states and just talking yesterday about improvements that he's already seen in terms of Mexican cooperation. We need to keep our eyes on that and work at the state level more and more to deal with this crisis until we have change that is badly needed at the federal level.
Rodney, last thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Ken more. Unfortunately, I don't see a lot changing over the next few years. I do believe that you have a great opportunity 2022. But the president's, that's not going to change, and I don't think they're going to change their position. So the states, and Texas specifically, really has stepped up. Again, we've had some conversations with some people in New Mexico, with Arizona, California, maybe not so much, but we'll continue to try. But really, a lot of it can be done at the state level, and there's more authority there than has traditionally been leveraged. Looking at that and figuring out how to approach it properly. But at the end of the day, what makes this country great is the fact that we get to vote and that we get to make sure that our voices are heard. So just actually getting a little bit more involved, having people being willing to have, kind of risky conversations right now with a neighbor about how important this is, and take it off the extremes. Because I think that I've had a lot of luck, even in California over my career, when you can get people to admit that border security is not racist, literally wanting to know who and what enters your home is just normal. It's the same thing at a national level. Reframing that conversation can kind of help reframe this entire conversation, because we're talking about our kids' future here. It's not just a today issue. We're with the amount of people that are being allowed into this country right now that we don't really necessarily know their values or how they're going to vote in the future. You're importing a state a year is what it looks like. It's not sustainable. I really encourage all the viewers out there. And then last but not least, I know we're going over, hey, use the sources of information. TPPF has a great website, a lot of information. The chiefs for the U.S. Border Patrol all have their own Twitters, their Instagram accounts, and they're still pushing out information without it being too filtered by DC. And before that gets shut off, I really encourage people to look at that so they know firsthand what's really going on and not filtered through some other source.
Well, Ken Oliver, Rodney Scott, thank you very much. And a special thank you to our viewing audience, all of those of you who submitted questions. I'm terribly sorry we couldn't get to them all due to time, but we're very grateful and appreciative, not just of your engagement with this live stream, but with your engagement for the cause of liberty in Texas and the United States in general. As a closing thought, the reason that we care about border security, the reason that we care about immigration, is really because they strike to the heart of what it means to be an American, and it strikes to the heart of what it means to be a nation. If we are a nation with all the attributes of a nation, the qualities of a nation, including sovereignty over our territory and a cohesive sense of who is one of us, then we must have effective border security. And that doesn't mean we don't retain our traditional American role as a lamp unto the nations, but it does mean we know, to borrow from Rodney, who comes in the door. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.